Dopamine is the brain's quiet vote counting system. It doesn't shout joy or pleasure in neon letters. It leans over and murmurs, "This mattered. Keep this." That whisper is enough to tell the future. Dopamine shifts probability. What fires again, what strengthens, and what gets remembered. Over time, probability becomes destiny at the cellular level. A useful way to think about dopamine is not as a reward, but as a plasticity gatekeeper. It doesn't create thoughts, it decides which ones are allowed to harden into structure. When dopamine show up, when dopamine shows up at the right moment, the brain briefly becomes more moldable, more willing to change itself. When dopamine arrives during a thought, habit, or behavior, plasticity increases across the active circuit. Synapses become more responsive to incoming signals. Molecular cascades are triggered inside neurons. Learning thresholds drop. The brain flags the pattern as worth preserving. At the synapse, dopamine bends to specialized receptors that function like biochemical dimmer switches. Once activated, they launch signaling pathways that amplify sensitivity. The perceiving neurons becomes easier to excite next time. This long-term potentiation, LTP in short, in action, the cellular mechanism behind reinforcement learning and habit formation. The synapse responds by upgrading its hardware. New receptors proteins are synthesized. AMPA receptors are inserted into the postsynaptic membrane. Signal transmissions becomes faster and more reliable. The connection gains competitive advantage over weaker synapses. It's the difference between shouting through a paper cup and transmitting through fiber optics. Same message, radically different efficiency. Dopamine also changes structure, not just sensitivity. Dendritic spines, the tiny protrusions where synapses live, respond dramatically to dopamine-rich learning. They swell, stabilize, and become less likely to retract. A swollen spine is a vote of confidence. The neuron is saying this connection earns its rent. Over repeated dopamine-tagged activations, spines grow larger and more durable. Synapses resist pruning. Axonal signaling becomes more precise. The circuit gains speed and efficiency. The pattern transitions toward automation. Eventually, the circuit graduates. The basal ganglia take over, and the behavior or belief runs with minimal conscious input. At that point, it doesn't feel like doing anymore. It feels like default. Biology has promoted the pathway to high priority status. Here in the opposite side, when dopamine doesn't arrive, the system turns the other way. Without dopamine, no importance tag is applied. Synapses becomes costly to maintain. Receptor density decreases. Dendritic spines shrink. Signal reliability drops. If the neglect continues, pruning mechanisms step in. Microglia, the brain's cleanup crew, began dismantling underused synapses. This is not punishment or failure. It is conservation. Neurons operate under tight energy budget. Circuits that don't justify their cost are quietly decommissioned. This explains a lot about everyday experience. Activities that feel exciting, rewarding, emotionally charged, or meaningful recruit dopamine and strengthening rapidly. Habits paired with novelty or relief stick. Meanwhile, beliefs or behavior that no longer receive emotional engagement or reward chemistry don't explode or collapse. They simply fade, molecule by molecule, receptor by receptor. The circuit dissolves. The crucial twist is this: dopamine is ethically indifferent. It doesn't encode truth. It doesn't encode goodness. It doesn't encode wisdom. It encodes relevance. If the brain interprets something as useful, energizing, or meaningful, dopamine supports it, regardless of whether the idea is constructive or destructive. This neutrality is why dopamine can build mastery, creativity, and resilience, and also, the bad side, obsession, addiction, and rigid belief systems. It's double-edged sword. Understanding dopamine give you a kind of internal map. Thoughts stop being ghost or mood and start looking like networks competing for chemical endorsement. What you repeatedly reward grows structure. What you stop rewarding loses its scaffolding. Dopamine doesn't force you to think anything. It simply remembers what you feed and adjusts the brain accordingly.